It's time for the CyberSecurity News Byte with Jim Guckin.
CyberSecurity News Byte, episode number 37, for December 5th, 2022. How not to handle vulnerabilities. HHS warns of pixel tracking tech may violate HIPAA. Trustcor dropped as a root certificate authority. And Hyundai app bug allows hackers to remotely unlock and start cars. Welcome to the show. So for the first story I want to talk about this week, I want to say it's an interesting one because it wasn't something that I had found doing my normal security research. Instead, it was an article by Review Geek. And they were saying, look, we have done the best of products for affordable Wi-Fi cameras, cloudless Wi-Fi cameras, and we have to say two of the companies we can no longer support. And that kind of got my interest piqued. And despite these two companies called Wise and Eufy being on this list many times, they are no longer being supported by Review Geek and a couple other websites due to the fact of how they handled a security vulnerability. Now, the two companies had two different security vulnerabilities and they handled it totally different. But from a security standpoint, it was a very interesting thing for me to read and kind of want to talk about because, if you have, products that customers rely upon and you offer some kind of service and they believe in the security of your service, especially being a security product like a camera, then, well, I think that there are some obligations and some ways that you have to handle that mistake that you made and how to make, the person whole again. So let's start first with the Wise cameras. Bitdefender on March 16th of 2019 found three major vulnerabilities. And the reason it was so far back is, Bitdefender, which they're kind of in their own hot water for this, made Wise, aware of these vulnerabilities and then just kind of let them get away with it for an extended period of time. So one of the major vulnerabilities in Wise, which is somewhat serious, but also probably had a very small impact on users, pretty much allowed unauthorized users to access the SD card. So if you had a Wise camera with an SD card, you can record the information to that local SD card for review later. And this vulnerability that they were made aware of, they didn't touch for 3 years. In fact, if you still have version 1 of the camera, it's still an issue. And this is because it runs a web server that you can get the videos from. So Wise on their website kind of gave people directions that if they're having problems, you make some port forwarding on your router to be able to view the cameras. And they say in the thing, which I think is funny, that hey, this might make things insecure. And it's not just insecure, it gives people access to, the SD card with all the videos on it. So right now we're talking about maybe not a serious vulnerability, because one, you need to have it, you need to have that camera, you need to have an SD card installed, and you need to pretty much have done port forwarding from your router. So the number of people who probably were impacted by this was very small. But what's scary is Wise didn't let the customers know. They even had the directions on their website about how to do it. And in fact, even when they patched this, they did not let people know that there was a vulnerability. And as I said, version 1 was never patched. So if you have version 1 of the camera and you meet those other two criteria, then, well, you're still vulnerable to this. And, they offer some small discount to upgrade your camera to the newer version, which, honestly, I think is a little bit insulting at this point. I mean, 3 years ago, you should have warned people this was a vulnerability. And it's a vulnerability they knew about. They knew about it. They knew some customers may be impacted. The majority probably would not be impacted by this, and they chose to hide it. So, not a good look. Now, the other one, Eufy, says, hey, look, you have this camera. It only stores videos and other relevant data locally. Well, as you can tell by the story, an information security consultant named Paul Moore, in a series of tweets, showed that the doorbell camera uploaded facial recognition data to Eufy's AWS cloud without encryption, and then stored alongside that a specific username and other identifiable information. So data was kept on Eufy's Amazon servers, even when the footage was deleted from the app. And, that would be bad enough in its own, because, hey, look, everything's stored locally, and you find out they're moving things to the cloud without you knowing. That's a bad thing, and most people would not, unless you're someone who is technology focused or a security researcher, probably not sniffing the traffic of your IoT devices. Now, also what was found was videos from the camera can be streamed via web browser by inputting a correct URL. There was no authentication needed to view the videos. And this was tested by Verge, the magazine, and they were able to prove the flaw. Now, the thing was the camera had to be, operating at the time and awake. So, some kind of alarm or notification or motion had to be set so the camera was awake. And they were able to use a crafted URL that had something like the serial number in it. And they were able to use, VLC player to view the stream. Now, when The Verge went and told Eufy about this, they said, well, it wasn't possible, and they continued to deny that this was even a thing. Yet, I'm pretty sure a magazine like that's not going to come and just make accusations. And if I could be honest for just 1 second, what really angers me is, a lot of security professionals fear or don't want IoT devices in their network. And look, I get it. But I always prided myself on being the one who goes, look, yes, things are out there. You got to know what you're doing. You got to know who has your data and stuff like this. And do your due diligence. And I have a lot of IoT devices. Now, I have them on a separate network segment, and, I monitor them to a degree. But I can't expect everyone to do that. And in the era where things are going to get more IoT-like, where you're going to be able to, use things via your phone or via your voice, this is not the way to handle that. And this erodes trust in those systems. All you have to do is admit there's a problem. Admit here's the solution. I mean, it wouldn't have hurt wise to go, hey, look, if you have an SD card, just take it out. Just take it out. Or, hey, don't port forward, because there's a vulnerability in which people can see your stuff. I'm never mad when a security flaw is found in a product I use. I work in technology. I expect that. But I expect the manufacturers behind it to be open and honest with me. Hey, here's a flaw. Here's how you can do it to protect yourself. Hey, we can't really fix it in a quick period of time. Not take 3 years. 3 years to do it. And kind of mad at Bitdefender who gave them the time. If you're unfamiliar, most bug bounty programs or places that search give 90 days. Hey, here's your vulnerability. 90 days, we're going to announce it. Bitdefender gave them 3 years. It's sad. And Eufy, to come out and say, hey, look, it's not possible. But someone's showing you that it is possible. Take time, listen to them. No one is so perfect that anything is impossible. I mean, it's one thing we've learned about computers over these times. Yes, they do exactly what they're told, but that's a flaw in itself sometimes. Because sometimes you can make it do things it wasn't expecting to do, or give it some kind of, a code that makes it easy for you, but then, can be found out. Like the UFI in the VLC thing. You need to know the serial number. Probably not a huge ordeal. You can probably easily, make that so people can't find it or someone has to know or have a database of this stuff. Like, it's not very vulnerable. Neither of these really are. And they hid it. They hid something that wasn't big. And that makes the whole security structure around it look weak. So, yeah, Review Geek, I can understand why you've pulled those from your list. And I can't blame you because, if you can't handle relatively small amount of impacted users with a vulnerability, then how can I trust that you'll handle a big one quickly, unless someone brings it up to you? Now, for our second story, it's kind of an interesting one to me because it wasn't one that, would stick out as something that was a problem, but obviously it is. So if you're not familiar, in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, there's a office called Office for Civil Rights. It's part of the HHS. And when you have a HIPAA violation or a breach, these are the people you kind of go to for it. So what's the problem here is that some health providers are using either Facebook or Google Pixel tech on their application, whether to identify, whether to log in, however it works. The problem is because that information sends the information to a third party that you as the patient have not allowed explicitly. Well, that may violate HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And the Office of Civil Rights said regulated entities aren't permitted to use these tracking technologies in a manner that would result in the impermissible disclosure of EPHI, so electronic private health information, to tracking technology vendors or any other violations of HIPAA rules. So by having this pixel tech, which is a pixel that is usually buried in a web page that has tracking information that gets pushed to your computer, you would never even know it's there. It's not something visible. Because pixels are obviously really tiny. And this is something that, I didn't think of. That, a third party may have this in there for tracking purposes. And they may be using it for, maybe a legitimate purpose. But that information still goes to either Meta or Google, and that could get, to those third parties and maybe to vendors. I don't know how. I mean, the back end of Facebook really is confusing, but you got to remember anything that is free on the internet. So your Gmail, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, those things are not really free. In fact, you're the product. They are selling you to someone else. Whether that be through direct information or something else along those ways. So this pixel is giving information to third parties, whether intentionally or accidentally, or someone didn't think about the whole, beginning to end structure that could be sharing your information. Because it could be your health portal. It could be something you log in to from your doctor's office and you fill information out. Like that is information that this pixel might be able to grab. And, it's not unheard of. In fact, this alert comes out about this pixel after several breach notices impacting about 6.5 million patients. And the breaches, a lot of them were tied to providers' decision to apply the pixel tracking tool to various parts of their websites, their apps, their patient portals, and hoped to gain insights into patient interactions. So, like I said, they were intended to be good. They were intended to give your provider a better understanding of how you interact. And in fact, it gave Facebook and Google that information. And I would say likely these providers were unaware, because they thought it was just internal. They were unaware that it was sharing that data with a tech vendor. But if you think through it, how do you get that information? It's not like you're crunching that data. It's not like it's pointing to a server you own. It's pointing to theirs. And once it's in their environment, it's theirs to do what it needs to do. So just something to think about if you're under some kind of HIPAA or some kind of other regulatory agency, that rolling out technology, you have to understand it from beginning to end and get a true idea of what, the flow of the data is doing. And if it's going to some third party for processing and reporting, then the data is not under your control and you need to be careful of it. For our third story tonight, which is not one that you hear quite often, there is a certificate authority out there named Trustcor, and Mozilla, who makes Firefox, and Microsoft have removed Trustcor systems certificates from their browsers, saying that, if you go to a website that has a certificate issued by Trustcor, you will get an error saying the certificate is not trusted. And Apple and Google were considering it, and they haven't really made a decision yet. But the more browsers that take it off, the worse it could be. Now, if you don't understand, certificate authorities are the people on the internet who have the ability to issue a security certificate for your website. When you go to HTTPS, there is a company that is overarching those that says, hey, this site is legitimate. I'm vouching for this because they gave me this information, and that's the way it is put there, and saying, hey, jimguckin.com matches the certificate, so this is a legitimate website. And the information sent from your computer to it is encrypted, so you cannot easily see it on the, someone sniffing the traffic. It can be done in certain circumstances. Nothing's, beyond hacking. But it's kind of the core and the backbone of the internet to trust these sites. And to trust sites, you have to trust the certificate authorities, the ones who are giving it out. So for Mozilla and Microsoft, and maybe even Apple and Google, to consider removing that from their browsers, that inherent trust, is pretty big. So that comes to why. Why are they doing this? So the Washington Post did an investigation, and they pretty much put this article out saying, hey, Trustcor has connections to a spyware vendor called Packet Forensics. They have some other ties to some other U.S. intelligence organizations. And that inherently would, if true, would break the trust. Like saying, hey, we can't trust you because you may be giving this information or you may be subverting this information, even for the U.S. government. And it's not a true encryption back and forth. Now, Washington Post pointed out that the company's physical address, when listed in a CA audit, was a UPS store in Toronto. Not something you really want for a certificate authority audit to say. Now, the business itself is registered in Panama, and that's where the company's based, so that's not a problem. But some documents in the business registration show that corporate officers, agents, and partners, including the CEO, have a link to Packet Forensics. In fact, going even further, Trustcor has an email product called MessageSafe, which says that it has end-to-end email encryption. Well, an investigation shows, it doesn't have end-to-end encryption. And in fact, there is a data harvesting SDK that is part of this. Now, these are all allegations. I haven't looked, so I'm taking the story for what it's worth. But I can understand that if I were made aware of this, if you were to say, hey, here's the allegations, whether they're true or not, at least until something can be done or verified, I wouldn't trust that certificate authority. As a person on the internet, I would not trust. Not as a security engineer. If something shady's going on, you can't pass your CA audit, or things are weird in your CA audit, I would much rather the browsers and the companies behind the browsers err on the side of caution. Now, if it's wrong and this information is found out to be false, then I immediately expect them to put it back in. But really, at that point, maybe the damage is done. I don't have a perfect solution for this. So if you're not familiar with Packet Forensics, which I was not, they're pretty much a federal government contractor. They sell communication intercept products. One of their products actually bypasses web browsers' SSL encryption, which of itself is bad, but if they are in bed with a SSL provider, well, that makes things even worse. Now, Trustcor did respond. Rachel McPherson, the VP of Operations, said that the article was filled with ridiculous false claims and out-of-context statements. Of course, they also said that there was biased researchers, which may or may not be true, but when I hear that, I immediately have a hard time believing the side. But to be fair, maybe they were biased. Now, Mozilla, Kathleen Wilson, who's a program manager with Mozilla, said, "Our assessment is that concerns about Trustcor have been substantiated and the risk of Trustcor's continued membership in Mozilla's root program outweighs the benefits to end users." Now, I should say, even if, as of right now, even if there's a link between these two, there is no evidence right now that Trustcor was misissuing certificates or using its certificate authority to abuse certificates. There's been none of that. It just happens to be these two companies are very closely tied together. They're government contractors. And to me, it's a business decision. Google and... I'm sorry, not Google. Mozilla and Microsoft, if they feel like they can't trust their certificate for whatever reason, that is part of their browsers being built in. Right now, if you didn't trust them, you could switch over to Chrome and be fine. But my guess is those two companies do not take lightly to removing a certificate authority from their browsers and from their certificate stores. That means they put a lot of thought in this, and they've weighed the pros and cons, and I guarantee it's not just one person going, "No, this is what we're going to do." They got the information, and they made a business choice. Whether right or wrong, it is a business choice. But as I said, if you were to give me these allegations and say, would I trust a certificate from them? Probably not. But you know what? One, I'm probably suspicious by nature. Why I rely on certificates. Do I trust anything? People can break the encryption. People can serve up a fake website with a fake certificate. I go in skeptical all the time, but I would say that, if you told me this was an allegation, I probably wouldn't at first believe or put trust in Trustcor. Whether right or wrong, and look, I could totally be wrong about this. There could be totally biased, or having your officers in another organization that rightfully sells communication spyware doesn't necessarily mean you're doing wrong, but I can see where people would be just a little bit hesitant. I swear I only do this to torture myself. So for our final story for this week, I like to tell you, I like to see myself as a technologist. I like to embrace technology. I understand the risks for it, but I love technology. Look, it's even like when I got my car, I was more focused on the technology that was in there than anything else. But I have to put myself too in a place where I'm a security professional, and when stories come up that kind of hit up against, my passion for technology, I have to admit there are flaws. We are not where we need to be with this stuff. And that comes to a story about Hyundai and Genesis car models that are after 2012 have vulnerabilities in the mobile app that controls your car, which could allow allow remote attackers to pretty much unlock and even start your vehicle. Now, ideally, the app should allow only authenticated users to start, stop, lock, and unlock their vehicles. But it's not always done in the way we need to. Security researchers pretty much found that by intercepting the traffic, they were able to extract the API calls and really dissect those to understand how the app was talking with the web server, and found out that validation of the owner is done based on the user's email address. And this information was found in the JSON body of post request, meaning they were able to sniff it and be able to find out what was going on. Even furthermore, if you had the My Hyundai app, it did not require you to confirm your email to register. You just need to know the email. So security researchers were able to create new accounts using the target's email and a special control character at the end, and pretty much sign up for this service. They sent an HTTP request to Hyundai's endpoint containing the spoofed address in the JSON token and the victim's address in the JSON body, and then it just bypassed any validity checks and gave them access to the vehicle. And it worked. They were able to test this script, unlock the car, and eventually, like most, security researchers, but most hackers, they pretty much found the multi-step attack. They whittled it down to a sign, so they were able to pretty much bake it into a Python script, which only really needed the target's email address for the attack. So, really scary to think that someone sniffing your traffic on a network could gain enough information or sign you up without confirming that you were signing up for it, that we're able to pretty much get access to your car. Now, the security researchers found this because they were actually examining another kind of flaw, which was based in the XM radio system, which a lot of car manufacturers were apparently using to piggyback their signal on top of. So, for every car brand using Sirius XM made past 2015, a similar flaw or the same flaw could be remotely used to track, lock and unlock, start and stop, honk the vehicles, or have their headlights flash just by knowing the VIN number on the vehicle, which anyone who's a little familiar with cars can tell you the VIN number is always just on the front of your windshield. It's not something that's hidden. It's not something that's special to you. I know most cars, they say as a theft deterrent, have it like 25 different places all throughout the vehicle, but the easiest one to see is right on the window. Now, for cars built before 2015, most of them are still plugged into Sirius XM, and it is possible to scan their VIN number through their windshield and take over their Sirius XM account, revealing their name, phone number, address, and some billing information hooked into the Sirius XM account. So, why technology is cool, and it's not going to stop me from going and getting it. I'm a technology fanboy. I have to admit, these kind of flaws are stuff that car manufacturers have to think of. And it's not just really car manufacturers, any IoT device. Because IoT devices don't get updated the same as our computers. They don't get updated the same as, our phones. Most of them are create and then forget about it. And as we're building, secure networks for businesses, car manufacturers have to take this same thought when adding technology to your vehicle. There was a famous Black Hat one where they were able to use a radio antenna at some distance and be able to independently brake cars' tires to kind of steer one way or the other or force to a full stop. We have to think about our technology as a computer or as a phone, getting updates, getting patches. What's the life cycle? And it's really weird to think about it that way because, most of our phones or our computers, look, if it makes it 5 years, that's great, but that's pushing it. Vehicles, on the other hand, have quite a longer lifespan, and we need to start thinking about that when it comes to the technology based in them. It's only been a handful of years we've had real computers in the cars. 15, 20 years. I mean, there are cars from the 50s that are still running. The 1950s. 70 years. And if a car has a current computer in it, and the computer controls everything about the car, and there's ways to access that computer, in all honesty, auto manufacturers have to figure out how to continue to patch for serious patches for 70 years, or we treat our cars exactly like our computers, and after a set period of time, it's obsolete, it gets no updates, and then, oh well, the risk is on you. And I don't think we're ready to go there as a society because, my computer breaks or anything along the lines, that sucks. my car gets hacked because it hasn't gotten an update in 5 years and it crashes and kills me, that's a bit of a different mindset. But it has to mature. Security still has to be a thought that these car manufacturers have when designing this, as well as all IoT devices. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to the show. Don't forget to check out our website, cybersecurity.newsbyte.com, or you can check out my personal website, jimguckin.com. Make sure you stay safe online, and we'll talk again next week.
You've been listening to the Cybersecurity News Byte with Jim Guckin. Learn more about our show at cybersecurity.newsbyte.com.